Conversations for change, because the world is ready. I find myself continually circling back around to this idea of the internal versus the external when it comes to our perspective, our worldview, our way of seeing the reality around us. And because I think a lot about the nature of personal reality and about how reality works, it makes sense, I suppose, that I keep coming back to this series of thoughts about the difference between an internally derived point of view and an externally derived narrative. What I notice is that there is an absolute ton of externally driven narrative in the world around us right now. There always has been, I suppose, but now there just seems to be so much. And every one of these external narratives has an entire story from beginning to end, which tells us how things are, why they are that way, and what we need to do about it. And every single one of these narratives also has a protagonist, an antagonist, a victim. All the players are here. But they're all narratives, and they're all narratives designed to get us to think in certain ways and to respond in certain ways and to believe certain things about the nature of reality and what we see around us that may or may not be true, and that may or may not be true for us individually, never mind for us as a collective. Because as a collective, we can be a little slow to realize when a narrative has been perpetrated for the purposes of driving us in a direction. Oh, we figure it out usually. The truth comes out, as they always say. But internally, most of us have not done enough work to determine which of the things that we hold to be true within ourselves, within our own thinking, feeling, being, got there by us experiencing things that taught us that this was the truth, and which ones got there because we adopted a narrative. And the truth is that for most of us, the narrative is what's running the show. And that's easy to see because when the narrative is running the show, people are way more reactive and way more defensive and way less willing or able to consider any other perspective or point of view on the topic. That in itself is a dead giveaway, and it makes it really easy to begin to discern and isolate the narratives versus the internal experiential perspectives. For myself, none of this became apparent or became part of my understanding until I went through a major crisis of understanding about the world around me, which I would say happened between the ages of 35 and 45, as I began to dig deeper into how this world really operated, the money powers, the medical system, the political system, all these different ways that we are manipulated and driven to conclusions and to points of view. And during that process, I began to understand that a lot of the things that I held to be true within myself were not things that I knew to be true within myself. They were just things I had adopted because of my upbringing, the political bent of the people around me in the world that I grew up in, lots of other factors. And not all the things that I had adopted were bad or wrong or misguided by any means. A lot of them were very good. Kindness is a good thing. Fairness is a good thing. And these were all things that were highly prized and valued in the world that I grew up in my childhood. They weren't always things I experienced, but they were held up as worthy and attainable and important. But there were other things. There were a lot of other things that were beliefs that I held because I had believed in a system and a way of thinking about that system that I had never examined for myself personally. And so as I began to unravel those things and to unravel my understanding of what was real in the world through my own research and investigation and extensive reading, I came to change my point of view on quite a few fundamental parts of the way I see the world. And I suppose doing that at the same time that I was also exploring my inner landscape and developing internal relationships with aspects of myself and my own spiritual and intuitive guidance system, made it possible for me to actually go through that process without having just a major implosion, because I had the opportunity to have some place to fall back to. And I was also in a relationship where it was safe to talk about all of these topics from a completely open point of view, without any preconceived ideas about what was right or what was true, or what was propaganda and what was not. And so that meant there was this open dialogue and exploration of all the things that we looked at and talked about, where we could take the time to discover the truth for ourselves through experience. And the reason I say all of this is because I think this is one of the most fundamental challenges that we have in the world right now, is that so many of us become so married to our point of view, to our perspective, that we are unable, literally, to consider an alternative perspective. We simply can't do it because we have built our character and our personality around that perspective. And it's one of the reasons that so many people feel bound and distraught, I think, in the world right now. Because until you set yourself free to be able to say neither this nor that, neither up nor down, left nor right, black nor white, but instead neutral, in a place where I'm open to discover in every moment what that particular experience or information really has to show me, really contains, that's of use to me in this moment. Until we get there, we're so stymied by our own perspective that it's very difficult for us to navigate in these tumultuous and chaotic and changing times. Times where so much of what we know is going to be dismantled, is dismantling itself. And so it turns out that the open mind is really the only safe haven. And an open mind really means willing to consider any perspective, any possibility, any experience that comes across your path. And to consider it wholly from the place of what is happening right now in front of me, without a preconceived notion of what it is. For me, what that's done is turned my entire political world on its head. I am no longer interested in any way, shape, or form in anything called politics, because I understand from this new perspective that all of it is driven by these narratives, none of which are true, which lead everybody into more chaos. So what I'm interested in is what are the solutions that can take us to where we need to go. And for me, that's the juicy conversation. And for the most part, a great deal of that information is just beginning to be understood and discovered. Whether it's regenerative agriculture and rebuilding soils, whether it's frequency medicine, whether it's spiritual awakening, whether it's new energy science, it doesn't matter. There's not a place in this world where we're not in the midst of incredibly fast-moving change and possibility. And from my point of view, who has time to argue about personality? Who has time to argue about old perspectives of right and wrong that are built on a system that was never about anything other than control in the first place? And until we understand that, there's really nowhere for us to go in a conversation. Because I'm not interested in the personalities of any of the people involved in any of the things that are happening in the world today. I'm interested in the people who are taking action to take us towards what we need to do to bring ourselves back into alignment with life. And that is a huge and very different conversation. And there are people on all sides of all perspectives who are doing things that are causing a problem for that, and that are doing things that are creating amazing solutions that take us where we need to go. And so that's really my criteria. And if I were to look at a single person and expect them to be anything that I need or everything that I need to solve any of this, it would be so completely ridiculous that you wouldn't even have the conversation in the first place. So from the very beginning that anybody who's out there in the political arena or the public eye is going to be able to be seen from every perspective as the villain, the savior. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The only question is, what are they doing? And those of them who are doing the things that are not working for us, give it time. And those of them who are doing things that are working for us, give it time. And a whole bunch of them are doing both. So does it serve us to condemn them? Or does it serve us to look for the things we want to see and encourage those? One of the things that I've learned in the years that I've been doing my own inner work is that the expression commonly used by Dr. Joe Dispenza and many others, frankly, that attention goes where energy flows, or energy flows where attention goes, is essentially saying this same thing. Whatever you put your attention on gets bigger. So put your attention on what you want. Because putting your attention on what you don't want is only going to make the problem worse. And it's a really hard lesson to learn. I can remember around the year 2000 being in a situation where I was watching something unfold that I knew was not going to be good for the people who were involved in it. And I knew it was going to create real hardship for them. But I suddenly had an insight and understanding that every single part of the equation of what was unfolding was something they were bringing into being through the way they had approached the situation in the first place. They were looking for the problem and wanting to make noise about it and wanting to bring it out into the world as something important that needed to be dealt with. And what was happening was the problem was landing right in their laps, and they were experiencing it directly, full on. And I remember sitting one night on the back deck and just looking at the sky and thinking about it and thinking, oh my God, I finally get it. This is how we call into being those things we put our attention on. And it wasn't that they were bad people, and it wasn't that the thing that they were putting their attention on wasn't wrong and shouldn't have happened, but it had already happened. And there wasn't any way that what they were doing was going to change that. All it was going to do was mean that those people in charge of and responsible for this thing that had already happened were now going to put their attention on the people who were saying this bad thing has happened and make them uncomfortable and bring it to them in such a way that it would change their ability to go on broadcasting this unhappy news to the world. And that's exactly what happened. And when I finally got it, it left me speechless, because I had thought all my life I had been taught, bad continues in the world because a few good men won't get up and say something about it, something to that effect. It's our job to go out and find the bad and root it out and fix it. And that's not our job. Our job is to be the creative beings and find the good and bring it forth and make more of it. And let go of the bad. And let go of putting our attention on those things which are trying to tell us that we are powerless to create change other than by pushing against what we don't want. Because that is not the truth. Pushing against what we don't want is the perfect way to continue struggling against what we don't want. The way we get what we do want is to turn our back on that thing and to put our attention on what we do want. And I have spent the better part of my life learning that lesson. And it doesn't mean that the civil rights movement didn't need to happen in this country. It did. But it does mean that at some point we have to step into the world where we demand the things that we are focused on as good to be what is happening. And it does mean that the way we bring about that change is by being the change. If we think that people should be treated fairly, then we treat people fairly. We don't go on a campaign and bemoan all the people who are not treated fairly. Instead, we become the magnet of how to treat people fairly. We inspire the world into a new place. We can't drag the world kicking and screaming into something better. That's not how it works. And it's probably taken me the better part of my life to figure that out. But I've learned it. And it's the same lesson that I've learned when it comes to being around the people who I love when they're in trouble and in hardship. It doesn't help them to point out to them that they should be doing something differently than they're doing according to you. That's not helpful. Loving them is helpful. Accepting them where they are and trusting that their inner guidance can lead them to what they truly want is helpful. Because you give them the confidence. You instill in them that sense of themselves that is what's lacking in that moment of self-doubt. Piling more doubt onto self-doubt is not taking them anywhere close to what they need. And it's an interesting and difficult lesson to learn in the world we live in today, because the world we live in today believes that punishment will get us what we want, and it never does. There is no punishment big enough to bring us the world that is the Garden of Eden that we deserve on this planet, that we're capable of building on this planet. The only way to build that is by loving the world back to life. We can't do it with poison. We can't do it with hatred. We can't do it with intolerance. We can't do it with impatience. We can only do it with love, generosity, patience, a centered willingness to trust in the divine within all living things. Not just some, all. And that's where we land when we have a truly open mind. We can't condemn anybody. And so we become the father of the murdered teenager who goes back and spends time in the jail with his son's murderer until forgiveness happens. We become the parent who can forgive the child no matter what they have done and welcome them home always with love. We become the person in our community who refuses to condemn under any circumstances, for any reason. That's how we change the world. And that's what we're here to do. At least from my perspective.